Good day and welcome to this week's episode of Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. I am your host, Rondell Donawa, and of course I'm happy once again to bring the law and you. You can stream us on WESN CC and all social media platforms. Now today we are going to speak about the elderly abuse because sometimes we take elderlies for granted and we see so many times that they are left at the wayside. And they have invested so much time, so much energy, so much effort in nurturing us as adolescents straight to adults. And it's very unfair that they have to be left there without proper care, without proper attention, emotionally, psychologically, physically abused. Now we're going to speak about elderly abuse and the law when it relates to Trinidad and Tobago from a broader perspective. And of course, my guest in studio today is Mr. Kirt Conrad Walrond, and he's an attorney at law of 12 years practice. He is in independent practice as well, and he's a social advocate. So I'm happy to have him as a guest. He will be here virtually. So good morning, Mr. Walrond.
A very good morning to you, Mr. Donawa, and a very good morning to your viewing audience. It is an honor and a pleasure, and I sincerely thank you for this invitation.
Thank you so much for for coming on and giving of your time and of course your advice in this area. Now you've written an article just recently, sometime in June 2021, relating to it's the headline "They Deserve Better." Tell us more about this.
Well, it started as a result of certain scenes that I think the entire nation would have witnessed, around June, when we saw our elders, older persons, in the rain, waiting to receive their vaccines. And I think that everyone was incensed. As a matter of fact, Her Excellency, President Paula May Weeks, spoke about that issue. And my article would have cited her comments. And it was roundly and widely condemned in terms of the way and the manner in which our elderly population at that particular point in time was treated when it came to that issue. And as a result of that allowed me to put pen to paper and write about it in a much more holistic sense. You see, there is an old saying that I personally don't subscribe to, and the saying is this: once a man, twice a child. But I would venture to submit to you that should really be amended to say, once a man, always a man, and once a woman, always a woman. Our elderly people have made sacrifices to build this nation into what it is today. And we are not a perfect society, but their blood, their sweat, and their tears cannot be unrecognized in this land. And as a result of that, seeing what we saw, I thought that, that it was time for someone to address it in a very holistic sense. And that is what prompted me to write that article, They Deserve Better, because as you rightly said, they do. And yes, we have for a long time been in the vein of an attitude in this country where we put our elderly people aside and we sweep this issue under the carpet, much like we would have swept the issue of climate change under the carpet globally for all these years.
Now, what is alarming though is that when researching on the statistics concerning report of elderly abuse, and the Social Development Minister, Senator Donna Cox, stated as of May 31st, 2021, the cases of elderly abuse has surpassed 2020. And basically what they were saying is that there were 174 reported cases of elderly abuse compared to last year. This is alarming, Mr. Walrond.
It is, Mr. Donawa, and we have to put it in its proper context because elder abuse occurs in two settings. The first is in the institutional setting when we are speaking about elder abuse taking place in care facilities or in homes for the elderly. And then in the other setting or the other spectrum, we have elder abuse taking place in private residences in the community. And the statistics would show, no matter how you slice the cake, the statistics show that it is much more prevalent, it seems, in the community in private residences. I will draw your attention and the attention of your viewing audience to something. There was an article that was published in The Guardian on the 31st of December 2020, just last year, old years. And in that article, it cited a case of a 92-year-old woman who was reported to have been living in what was described as a house of horrors in El Dorado. And thankfully for her neighbors, I believe that is when the authorities would have been alerted, and they responded to a situation in which they found her living in squalor. And they found her with open wounds on her legs. Now, I ask you, Mr. Donawa, and your viewing audience, that could never be just, and that could never be right. And on top of that, she was found to have been living in and around garbage.
Wow.
And what is alarming as well is, as Her Excellency also highlighted in her observance of World Elder Abuse Day in June, there seems to be a trend of underreporting that is taking place when it comes to this issue. And that as well has to be examined. So I cited that as an example of the extreme of the situation. And even though we have certain numbers in terms of the statistics, there is no guarantee that those are the actual numbers, because we are, as the Honorable Minister of Social Development said, engaging with an issue that is a silent epidemic. And there may be a lot more cases than that we do not know about. But one of the things, if I may add, with your permission, of course,
Sure.
is that the police in that case, thank you, the police in that case mentioned something, and this is something that we must all adhere to. The police in that case said that when we see something happening, we have a duty to report it. In other words, the old saying goes, when good men do nothing and good women do nothing, evil will flourish.
That's
So
right.
it is incumbent upon us to report what we see. And I mean, we owe it to our senior citizens, I believe, to do that.
Now, when it comes to the law, now obviously as senior citizens, they are down in age, they don't really understand their rights and obligations. And most times they accept the abuse very reluctantly, because they have nowhere to turn to, because they're afraid if they speak out, then they will be treated even harsher. And then they don't want to leave their living condition to go to a home, as you will have seen most time. Now, in terms of remedies that are available to these elderly persons, are there any specific laws that is created directly to abuse of elderly persons, or is it just normal under these the Summary Courts Act or the Summary Offences Act in terms of those type of legislation?
Well, when it comes to abuse in care facilities or abuse in homes for the elderly, the Private Hospitals Act is the act that governs, not primarily abuse per se, but that's the act that governs the administration of homes for the elderly or care facilities for the elderly. But that act does not specifically speak to the issue of abuse. As a matter of fact, what that act does, it primarily speaks about the licensing of homes, and it also prescribes certain penalties for homes that operate without a license. It is illegal for any home for the elderly to operate in this country without a license. And as a matter of fact, the Ministry of Social Development, through the Division of Aging, has a center called the Older Persons Information Center. And that is where all cases of abuse against the elderly are reported. That is where you would primarily get your data from. When it comes to the community setting and elder abuse in the community, in private residences, our laws are scattered. And in one instance, you would have to go to the Domestic Violence Act. In another instance, you would have to go to the Offences Against the Persons Act. And this is why in July of this year, the Ministry of Social Development held a very, very insightful and informative webinar. And I attended the webinar, and I learned a lot just by being there. And as a result of that, I also was privy to, as were others who were present, whatever policy initiatives and plans that the ministry has been undertaking at this time. And I would actually like to publicly commend the ministry and the minister for their initiative, because it is needed. And you touched on something that was very important, and that is education, sensitization, especially amongst our elderly. Many of our elderly citizens may or may not, for whatever reason, know the grand scheme and perspective of the rights enshrined under this issue. And as a result of that, it is imperative for them and for all of us to understand it in a very broad sense, so that we can tackle it and address it, Mr. Donawa, in the way that it needs to be addressed.
No, let's
what I may add, if it's possible. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you go ahead. I would ask thereafter. You proceed.
Sure, not a problem. Thank you. What I was going to add is that is why we need omnibus legislation to tackle this, because what we have at the moment is not sufficient. As a matter of fact, there is a Home for Older Persons Act that has been assented to, and it was assented to in 2007. But guess what? It was never proclaimed.
And that is an issue.
Regulations. Yes. There are regulations as well. The Homes for Older Persons regulations in 2009 was never proclaimed. And I have to ask the question, why in this instance? Because, I mean, if we have been sitting on this legislation all this time, and this is an issue that is not new to our society, I believe that the time has come for us to act. And I am happy that the Ministry of Social Development has taken that step in the right direction.
No, let's deal with elderly homes. Now, you've cited that these are governed under a particular piece of legislation, but there are many homes in Trinidad and Tobago, some that are known to be unlicensed. And what happened is that there are a lot of issues with respect to neglect, negligence, where elderly are abused, they are not given their medication, their food, families would visit and they have bed sores, then they die. Now, what redress do they have if these homes are unregistered, which many times they are?
Well, once reported to OPIC, which is the Older Persons Information Center, OPIC would then, as I understand it, investigate. And in investigating, OPIC would reach out to other supporting agencies of the government, such as the TTPS or the Ministry of Health. As a matter of fact, you cannot enter into a home for older persons without the necessary inspector appointed by the Minister of Health being part of that team that enters to inspect to see what is happening. But it all starts with reporting. Now, the redress that the older person would have in that instance would be under the criminal law when it comes to physical abuse. But as it were, again, it all comes back to this issue or this problem or this case being identified. And once identified, action can be taken.
Now let's deal with, at the moment, the Home of Older Persons Act. So, yes, Homes for Older Persons Act. And in terms of a centralized legislation, it's not enforced. If an elderly person is abused, what steps can they take beside, yes, it's reported, so that probably investigation, criminal proceedings, but in terms of a private complaint, I know the Domestic Violence Act has been amended in terms of a person or a friend or someone can act on their behalf. Just walk us through in terms of what sort of procedure to allow for that complaint to be filed in court.
Well, the OPIC, as I would have mentioned, is the number one vehicle through which these complaints are made, because that is the center that deals with complaints primarily. If the older person is not in a position to care for himself or herself, as may primarily be the case, it would be incumbent upon the arms of the state to initiate those proceedings, primarily through the magistrate's court for first instance. And once the investigation is complete and there is a perpetrator of abuse, charges can be laid against that perpetrator. And I'm speaking specifically of physical abuse. There are other forms of abuse that we can get into. And even when we come to other forms of abuse, if I may, other than physical abuse, there is financial abuse. It was reported as well that there were a few instances earlier in this year, and one is too many, but a few instances earlier in this year of stolen pension checks or the misuse of pension checks. And once an investigation, and I mean, that again cannot be allowed to continue. And once an investigation is done and complete and the perpetrator is found, of course, that person must be brought to justice through the relevant criminal court, starting with the magistrate's court. But it would be incumbent upon the various agencies of the state working in tandem with each other to come together as a team, working for the good of that elderly person. Because as I would have mentioned before, the elderly person, the elderly citizen may not be in a position to bring any charges or start the procedure for himself or for herself in that instance.
All right, Mr. Walrond, we have to take a break. We'll be right back in terms of our further discussion. You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN. We'll be right back.
WESN says thank you for your support this past year with giveaways until Christmas 2021. 4 steps to win. Watch our programming throughout the day. Look out for the WESN Santa pop-up. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Comment the name of the show and the time you saw Santa under the Santa post of the day. Win cash, hampers, vouchers and WESN merchandise. Promotion ends December 20th, 2021. Brought to you by Nestle, Westby's Supermarket, Worrell Regis and Company Limited, Fan Zone, and Crisp Clean Cleaning Solutions. Gift giving during a lockdown can still be hassle-free with a gift from Fan Zone with delivery options available nationwide. Visit and browse our Facebook and Instagram pages for all your official licensed merchandise and apparel and have it delivered to your door. Find us on Facebook and Instagram. Fan Zone, we've got you covered. An all-new season of Psyched is back. Join host psychologist Sule Joseph as he explores mental health in Trinidad and Tobago. This season, we want to hear from you. Call in and have your say every other week. Look out for the numbers on screen to call. It's Psyched, Thursdays at 11 a.m. only on WESN, Content Capital.
And we're back on Strictly Legal, WESN Content Capital. We are speaking with Mr. Kirt Walrond, attorney at law, speaking about elderly abuse in our society and the law. So, Mr. Walrond, before the break, we were talking about the remedies that are available, of course, through the criminal aspect. But in terms of the remedies that are available, if someone wants an elderly person wants to take out a protection order under the domestic violence, what sort of procedure is there?
Well, the Domestic Violence Act speaks to that, Mr. Donawa. It provides for victims of domestic abuse in that sense, particularly physical abuse, which is what the Act was designed for, to seek that redress. And the TTBS, the police, would have the power to respond under that Act to those domestic situations. Because when you think of it, in those situations when our elderly citizens are subjected to physical abuse, whether it is in the care facility or whether it is in a private residence, the Domestic Violence Act is widely utilized, especially protection orders to ensure that the victim of abuse, the elderly person, receives the necessary protection under the law. Yeah,
and you know, we are hearing so many things about national policy, etc., etc. Now, at one time, one has to draw the line. And how long will this take? How long will these laws take to proclaim? How do you see we moving forward in terms of addressing all these issues?
Well, there is a national policy on aging that is currently under review by personnel at the Ministry of Social Development. And as I understand it, having attended their webinar in July, the procedure for that review is that their internal executive team will make certain decisions based on that policy in its review. And once those decisions are made and a draft is finalized, that approved draft, once approved internally at the Ministry of Social Development, would then be circulated to other state agencies for their review and recommendation and so on. And if there are any revisions will be done. And once that happens, a second draft incorporating all of those in internal recommendations and internal feedback and so on will ultimately lead to what we call a green paper, a public consultation. And that green paper will come before us, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, for us to enter into a much needed and long awaited discussion on this issue, so that omnibus legislation, comprehensive legislation to govern elder abuse in its holistic sense, in its breadth and scope, can be passed. But of course, everything will naturally have to take its course. My only concern, and whilst I am thankful that the Ministry of Social Development has taken a very great and appropriate step in the right direction on this issue, my only concern is bureaucracy, and something that we call red tape, which is something that we are all familiar with living in Trinidad and Tobago. And if I may add, Mr. Donawa, I always believe in speaking truth to power. I strongly believe in that. And one of the things that I believe that we need more now on this issue, or what we would need to ensure that this issue is given the attention that it deserves, is unity. Unity amongst our leaders. I believe that this is an issue that all of our leaders, no matter what side of the divide you are on, that this is an issue that our leaders can unite on. The Prime Minister of Barbados, in her address in Glasgow, which was widely praised, she said, or she asked the question, very important, when will leaders lead? And my answer to that is that leaders will lead when they unite. Yep. And that is what we need in order to ensure that this matter progresses in the way that we want. I believe that everyone has good intentions, but good intentions must be backed up with the appropriate action.
Because at the end of the day, we will all age at some point in time. And it's more, yes, I mean, yes, we have all the laws in place, but it's all about the social moral responsibility at the end of the day. And it is noteworthy that you mentioned the Prime Minister of Barbados, because I mean that is a line that resonated with me in terms of when would leaders lead. And our society as a whole, I mean, not speaking only about leaders in terms of government leaders, but leaders in all aspects of our society. Because we have leaders in our homes, we have leaders in our church, in our schools, in our community, even in the legal fraternity. And it is something that obviously needs to be championed in terms of the advocacy or groups that are advocating for elderly persons. Are there such type of groups that form part of this awareness that you are aware of?
Yes, there are. One of the things that I would speak to is that even in my article, I would have cited that there is room on the table for everyone to get on board. As a matter of fact, our youth have an important role to play in this issue as well, so that the intergenerational gap can be bridged. This is actually a perfect opportunity for schools, for our students, to particularly those who study social studies, for our students to get their teeth sunk into, because we have a golden opportunity, Mr. Donawa, to bring everyone together on something that I believe that we can unanimously say is a social ill. And in that way, this silent epidemic can be altered into something that we can proudly say that we addressed.
Yes.
And we don't want to go down into the corridors of history as having been blind to that issue. There are many non-profit organizations that that work for the good of our people. And they do a tremendous amount of work. But at the end of the day, regardless of the different goals that we may all have, I believe that we can come to some sort of an understanding collectively as a nation that our elders have for a long time been neglected.
Now, in terms
yes.
Now, in terms of our, let's say, other Caribbean islands, is there any research in terms of statistics as to compared to Trinidad and Tobago of such type of abuse, or whether they have also laws in place for protecting the vulnerable?
Yes, Jamaica is, as I understand it, facing a similar trend. The actual numbers I don't have before me at this time, but I think that in the Commonwealth Caribbean, we do not have, as far as I am aware, that sort of comprehensive legislation to govern the issue that I am clamoring for in this forum, or that the Ministry of Social Development is at this time pursuing. When we are addressing an issue as critical as this, we cannot afford to have our laws all over the place as it is. And that is why we need that sort of teeth from the Parliament to enforce some sort of redress in terms of this ill that we all recognize is something that must be tackled holistically.
I agreed. Mr. Walrond, I know we are soon out of time, so any other closing remarks that you want to provide? I mean, more particularly in light of, just before you do that, while the Ministry of Social Development is the driving force behind the policy, etc., it is the Attorney General's office that also has to push that legislation, of course, through Parliament to ensure that it is effective, as well as understanding. And if you can just probably briefly just explain in terms of, yes, laws can be assented by the President, but why is it that, or who proclaims so that it can be effective?
Well, proclamation would be done by gazetting, so it is in fact the state, the government, that would have to proclaim the Homes for Older Persons Act to begin with. But of course, it's all subject to review. And if something is subject to review, it means that there are persons that see the need to probably, adjust certain things for the benefit of the entire society. But again, I would venture to say in ending, Mr. Donawa, that I'm very happy that your show, that the WESN was able to address this issue in this forum. And I'll tell you why. Because it starts with dialogue. And the voices of our people on this issue have to be heard in one way, and in the other spectrum, it has to be heard through our honorable parliamentarians in both houses. And in a community as diverse as ours, and as small as ours, nothing escapes anyone. And as the police have said, if there is an ill that you are aware of, you report it. We have the mechanisms, We have the mechanisms, but there are adjustments that have to be made so that it's seamless and so that it's smooth. And of course, in ending, so that our elderly persons are treated with the dignity that they richly deserve.
Indeed. As you said, treated with dignity as they richly deserve, because at the end of the day, we would all get old at one point in time, and we don't want to be treated the same way.
Yes.
So Mr. Walrond, thank you so much for gracing us and just discussing the need for protection of our elderly in the society. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Donawa, and if I may add, a very Merry Christmas to you and your viewing audience as well. All the best.
Thank you, and God same to you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. So guys, you have been watching Strictly Legal with Rondell Donawa on WESN Content Capital. Thank you to my guest, Mr. Kirt Walrond, attorney at law. And of course, you can catch the replay on WESNCC.com, as well as view our podcast at strictlylegalwithrondelldonawa.com. Thank you so much. God bless. Take care.